Dr. Dan's Freedom Forum is on the air.
This is Dr. Dan. This is Dr. Dan, and this is Dr. Dan Live, streamed every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. 8 p.m. Eastern Time to YouTube, X, Facebook, and Rumble. Tonight, adventures in libertarian problem solving. Every day, everyone is confronted with problems, some major, some minor. How you choose to solve problems reflects your personal worldview. Most people have a worldview. That is their concept of what the perfect world should look like. The question, of course, is who is going to pay for your worldview? If in a perfect worldview, there is no hunger, and you purchase food and spend one day each week working in a soup kitchen in the inner city, I have no problem with that. That's called charity. If you expect the government to tax me to fund your worldview, however, I will vehemently object. You see, charity is voluntary, but taxation is theft. In fact, we all spend lots of time complaining about governments at all levels taxing us to pay for other people's worldview. And that's kind of the subject we are going to examine tonight with Susan Hogarth of the North Carolina Libertarian Party. Now, Susan got invited to a presidential candidate meeting in Western Kansas in 1988. She went, and there were 20 to 30 people there. The speaker, of course, was Ron Paul, and the speech was electrifying to Susan, who was a recovering Democrat. She became active with the Libertarian Party in the late 1990s in North Carolina, served terms as county and state chair, has served as a regional representative on the national committee, and has run for office and volunteered on campaigns far more often than her husband cares to contemplate. She is currently suing, with support of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, called FIRE. She is suing the North Carolina Board of Elections for the obvious First Amendment right to photograph her own ballot. This led to the surreal headline in the last presidential election of, "It's illegal to photograph your ballot in North Carolina unless your name is Susan Hogarth." Now, Susan works for a cancer-focused biobank supporting research projects around the U.S. and beyond. So, Susan, welcome. As a guest
Hey,
on
uh,
Freedom Forum,
glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here tonight. So, here's what I want to do. Let's talk about some of the real issues facing our country, and in the perfect libertarian worldview, how do we go about solving them?
You mean real issues like I just saw something that scientists now think, at least one group, that the universe may actually be dying and expanding terminally and destined to heat death. So, oh, you meant like more immediate. Okay, sorry. I do get like weird existential dread when I hear things like that, so it's on my mind. But more immediately, yes, we have things like housing and not having wars, and yeah.
So, those are the kind of things that we really need to talk about, because outside of what's happening in the cosmos, over which we have zero control, and
For
things
now.
for now, yes, and global warming, over climate change, over which we have absolutely no control either. But there are real problems that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so the question is, Susan, why don't you talk about some of those problems? And as a libertarian, what is the best solution that we can offer people as an option to the uniparty?
So I have some, I have a lot of fun ideas for. I'm philosophically an anarchist, and everyone says, "Well, what would you do about roads, and how would you pay for roads?" I always thought it would be fun, or I have thought it would be fun to have toll roads, but the roads would be free, but space on the roads for commercial activity, like if you want to run a gas station, the road owners would charge for that. So you would still be paying taxes for the roads, but just in the normal course of buying gasoline or buying pork rinds at the rest stop, and the merchant there would be paying the road owner. So like there are so many really interesting possible solutions to every different problem. You could have giant companies, you could have nonprofits running roads, but that's kind of one of the traps that we get into as libertarians when people um, talk about solutions. Like if I came up with if I put out my road thing, they'd say, "Oh, so you're running for office because you want to have these giant rest stops that pay for the roads?" And no, not necessarily. What I'm saying is that that's one potential solution. Someone might use it somewhere, no one might use it. It might become widespread adoption. We have this government-centered mindset now where there has to be a solution to each problem, and that's one of the really big messages I think that libertarianism has for people, or should have for people, and it's kind of that it can be a difficult one to deliver, because we're saying, people say, "What would you do?" Well, I would let you do your thing. I would let you braid hair and set your own prices, or sell whatever plants you want to sell. And if you were concerned about the purity of your food, I would let you, you know, um, have you could choose which organization you wanted to test your food. We you would have the freedom to find the solutions that suited you. So we really have gotten into a mindset that there is one solution for every problem. There's a healthcare solution, there's a housing solution, and it's never right for everyone all the time. Everyone knows that there's no one solution that's right for everyone all the time. We all know that intuitively. We know that, from reading Hayek, if we're geeks, but it's hard for people to get out of the mindset that there's going to be some agency that's going to have the solution to their problem. So I don't know what the solution would be. And I don't think, as libertarians, we can offer ideas, but there's a trap that we get into sometimes where we offer an idea like power. Oh, it would be great if we had more nuclear power plants. I actually think that. So someone says, "Oh, so you're an advocate for nuclear power." I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a businessman, so I don't know. I mean, it seems like a good idea, but it I'm not an expert on that thing, and I'm not making money from it. Someone who is might be willing to invest. So we have to trust the market, and trust that people will pay for the things that they want and will not pay for the things that they don't want. Um, and yeah.
So realistically, you're talking about things that went on in this country in the beginnings, so to speak, because originally the nation, the federal government was small, limited by the Constitution. They collected user fees, pretty much tariffs and things like that. There was no income tax. And so you really had a lot more freedom because you were able to spend the money you earned on the things that you wanted, rather than have them take the money and spend things spend your money on things you don't want. You also had the ability to deal with local people, to purchase goods, sell goods, test goods, or whatever else you wanted to do. And that was the way things were in the beginning. And
Schools is a really good example of that.
sure,
Um,
absolutely.
Now we try to have as much standardization and control over schooling, and every libertarian knows that's a disaster for several reasons, economic and philosophic. Um, but we got into this idea that everyone had to go through the same program, that everyone had to go to the same kind of school for the same length of time for the, the and that has been nothing but an unmitigated disaster. Um, yeah,
Well, schools are a very good example of that. And that's why some parents, more in certain counties than others, do homeschooling because that gives them the option of controlling the curriculum for their own children. That's a big commitment for some parents. It's probably a bigger commitment than most parents can make. And so the problem then is that the government has stepped in, and we're now the victim of government education, government schools on several generations of kids who really have not been taught well, and they have been not been taught about freedom, about free markets, and about all the things that we know they should have been taught.
there are some good things though. Like people are starting to realize, and I say this as someone who has a college degree, but they're coming to realize not everyone needs a college degree. Um, And in fact, it's definitely something you shouldn't go into debt to the tune of, a house mortgage amount of money or more just to get the degree or the training to be a doctor. So we're coming up with alternatives. Trade schools are becoming more popular. There are things like SpaceX is running a school in Texas, and when you bring these things up, well, companies would obviously invest in having educated workforce in their towns, in their communities. When you bring that up, people laugh and regurgitate the sort of stock history they learned in the government schools, which is they'll say, "Oh, you want company towns, you want, people to just go to the company store and be owned by the company that." No, but that's what we have now. I mean, we have company towns. It's just that we have one giant corporation um, that has usurped the power over every other corporation, the government, and 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 runs things, for its own benefit, because that's how it's going to be. If you are in a company town and you don't like their schooling, go somewhere else, get another job. Um, I'm not trying to introduce some kind of neo feudalism, but people will bring that up every time you bring up some interesting, innovative program like that. Uh, yeah, but there is a lot of interesting stuff going on, new thinking, um, people trying to break out of these.
Well, education is really a very important topic because it's very important. It's really important to the country that we have a group of educated people coming up below. Otherwise, you don't have people to take over. You don't have educated, trained people to take over for the older people as they retire or stop working or whatever. And I do think that the founders of our country, they really understood the necessity of education, but they didn't necessarily provide for it, and they certainly did not envision it being used as a source of indoctrination, which is really what it's become now. Government
Right,
schools,
when it should in fact be the exact opposite. The
right?
first and main goal of an education should be teaching people how to think critically and judge the world around them. And that is the thing that we're lacking now because it's been systematically eradicated from most school programs.
That's really what's happened. We as in our county, of course, we're fighting the same battles. And you mentioned something I think is really important. I mean, college education is really unnecessary for many children who go to college. They're going to college. Really, I guess it would be adult babysitting service or whatever you want to call it, or adult playtime.
4 year, yeah, I was going to say 4 year vacation.
A 4-year vacation, because you spend a bunch of money to get a degree which is useless. A very high percentage of people who graduate with a bachelor's degree of some kind from a college, they can't get a job with the degree that they spent $100 or $200,000, depending on the college, to get. That is, it's worse than a waste of money. That's really fraud to me. It's fraud perpetrated on families and on children to go spend that money, get a degree, and have it be useless.
My
More
husband's
important,
a great example. I did a lot of dumb things college wise, so I won't use myself as an example, but my husband, he has an undergraduate degree in biology. He didn't want to borrow money and he didn't want to take money from his parents. So he put himself through his undergraduate degree in like 5 or 6 years by working in the physics or engineering, I can't remember, machine shop. And so while he was getting the biology degree, of course, he was very interested and still is in snakes, reptiles, that kind of thing. And of course, you think, oh, well, I could be a scientist or I could be a ranger or whatever. And then you get close to getting your degree and you realize you can, and this was 35 years ago, you can't get those jobs. Those are hard to get. So the scam aspect is they're like, well, but you could stay and get a master's degree or a doctoral degree. And to do that, you need money, but that's okay because you can borrow it. And then you're kind of trapped in the system. And if you ask anyone or ask a group of, 50 people, how many of them are working in the field that they studied as an undergraduate in college, I think it's probably, maybe half. I don't know. I'm in biology now, but for a long time I wasn't. So I think, to finish my husband's story, he looked at all this, at the situation. Meanwhile, as he had been working in the machine shop, he learned a lot about machining materials. He started getting interested in building things, machine tools actually. So it's kind of reiterative. And he decided to be a machinist. Now he has his own shop. He's still really interested in biology, flips rocks. We have a copperhead in our house. So all those things are still part of him and he learned a lot. But what was the more useful part of his education? It was the mathematics that he mostly taught himself, and the machining that he definitely taught himself by working.
well, that's kind of a common story, really. When people go to college, I mean, some students understand that they are there for a purpose to gain knowledge in order to have a career that is going to carry them through life and be able to raise a family and the like. Unfortunately, a larger percentage think it's playtime and they try to get through. And then at the end, they're just caught because they've spent the money. They don't have something that's
That's
marketable.
me.
And some are fortunate to be able
Yeah.
to be employed, and others are living in their parents' basement.
I
And
mean, look at something like being a doctor or a lawyer. It takes serious, like absolute focus over a long period of time to get those skills and critical thinking and experience. And if you, I mean, who at 17 knows that is the path they want and is able to follow it in that kind of focused, dedicated way. I know there are people, God bless them. I wasn't one, but you know, and that's college. If we go back a little bit into high school, this is maybe a little more controversial, but like, uh, I loved high school. I mean, I loved the academic part of it. So I'm not criticizing in my own sense, but or out of my own experience. But say you're in high school and you are a visual artist, like a talented visual artist, or say you're someone who has like a gift for automobile mechanics and like that's your thing and you're laser focused on it and you're amazing at it. 6 to 8 hours a day, you got to go sit in this place, and then you got to go home and think about it for longer, and listen to people talk about Shakespeare, and don't get me wrong, I like Shakespeare, and calculus and things like that. In the time when your brain is forming and um, your abilities are growing, so like you could be completely. I mean, there are programs for mechanics and there are programs for arts, students, but you're lucky if you get into one or if people around you, the adults around you, recognize these things. You could be lost in a system like that where your nascent abilities and interests are being thwarted at the same time that a bunch of crap is being stuffed in your head. And that's even aside from all the
Well,
uh
that's one of the things that some school systems are really trying to do. We're trying to do that here in our county. We recognize that the vast majority of our high school students don't belong going to college, but they do have vocational interests and vocational skills. So what we're trying to do is to combine our community college, which has a very, very large vocational program. They have over 40 different vocations that they teach on an active basis. We're trying to get a program going that, well, we already have an early college program, which is fine for people who are academic. But what we are trying to do is get a school on that campus in which students who really should be vocationally trained can get vocational training and walk across the stage with a high school diploma.
That's
And
fantastic. I'd like to
and,
see more of that.
and that really is what would serve the needs of those students. And I have no problem uh, from a taxation point of view. It's kind of an investment in the future. But the problem is when the schools are not actively working for the benefit of the students, the long-term benefit of the students. That's really what the crime is.
Well, and again, it goes back to that thing that we started with. There's never just one best solution for everyone or for every situation. It's, super flexible and fluid, and large bureaucratic organizations aren't capable of that kind of response, individual response. I know teachers and administrators on an individual basis really try to make that happen. I mean, I, I was helped by people. I know people, dedicate much of their private time when they're teaching to making those connections and helping young people. Uh, it shouldn't be that it shouldn't be that way. I mean, it should be a function first of the families and of the community of that child. Um, yeah.
Well, again, the family unit is really has to be the primary source of inspiration and guidance for kids. That really works best. It has worked best for centuries.
In
Uh,
most cases.
most of the time, obviously not all the time, but if you have that kind of a family unit, then that's what you have to rely on as a child for guidance. I know in my family, that's the way it was because we had grandparents and parents who valued education for the purpose of knowledge and career. And that's what my siblings got, and my cousins got, and and even my parents. So,
So that this is one of the problems with people's reliance on the state, is that when you bring up things like that, people will have an example. Oh, well, what if the family isn't supportive, or the family isn't there for the child, or there's no one in the community looking out? Uh, Therefore, we need a giant federal government. I mean, it seems like a giant leap. And again, as libertarians, when we're talking to people, we have to be able to recognize that not all families are like June and Ward Cleaver, and not all kids are going to have the best situation. But having a large bureaucratic organization that's mostly dedicated to keeping itself strong isn't necessarily the best response either. So, it's like people think when you say the state shouldn't have such a strong hold over education, then they're saying, oh, so you want, incompetent or uninterested parents, responsible, so that, kids get left out. Here's the thing: they get left out of a bureaucratic organization too, and probably more so. The parents are like, the school's got it. That's what we're paying them for. And so there's that abdication of responsibility, and there's just not the right kind of flexibility in a bureaucratic organization.
well, so here's a question. Okay. You and I both know that Article 1, Section 8 sets out the limitations of the federal government. So
You know that. I'm not a big fan of the Constitution, but I got you.
I am a big fan of the Constitution. It's not being followed now for the
I was
most
going to
part.
say it would be a good starting point.
It would be a good starting point. That is correct.
I'm there.
So the question then comes in to, is there a level at which government needs to be, is there a level at which government assistance, not assistance, a bad word, that's not what I meant. Is there a level at which the government needs to be active in the lives of people? What is that level appropriately? Is there any level?
So you're probably asking the wrong person for this question, but not really. It's funny, I was just engaged in a conversation today about this, and someone else put it really well. The only, and I think like the Libertarian Party platform states this in some form or another, the only legitimate purpose of a state or government can be to protect the rights of individuals. The biggest threat to the rights of individuals right now is the state. Surprise. So when you rely on one thing to protect you, it is going to become a menace. It's just like the bully in the playground. He protects you from other bullies because he wants all your lunch money. So yeah, the state's going to protect us to some degree, but will it protect our rights? Absolutely not. But if there is any legitimate role for a government institution, it's to protect the rights of individuals, not some nebulous we, not the country. The country has no rights. Not Americans. It's individual people, any people who have the same basic human rights.
I would argue to the point that in its original form, when it was written, the Constitution did exactly that. That's how it was designed.
For men.
Well,
and white men.
well,
But
I
cutting
understand.
that aside, yes.
Yeah, but it was written at that time. You're talking 250 years ago. Society was very different. But the words, if you look at the words of the Constitution as a contract between the people and the government. If those words were being followed exactly now, our rights would be intact. The Bill of Rights was very specific about all of the rights that we're all concerned about, many of which have been taken from us in spite of those written words now 250 years later. But back in that time, that was a very wonderfully crafted document that, had it been adhered to, well, things would be a lot different now.
Yeah, I think I think it was a big step forward. The whole American Revolution, the Republic, big step forward in
But
the
look,
idea of individual rights.
of course, what did we
Uh,
have before that? We had a monarch who was a dictator.
to
That's who
be
we had.
fair, ugh,
Right.
to be fair, um, even the English monarch had been. So a lot of times people like to say, "Oh, the world's been getting worse and worse for individual rights, and people are scared about Palantir and government super or surveillance and travel restrictions." But if I think if you have the bigger historical perspective, the reason that we're feeling such discomfort right now with the constraints we do have is that we have become a society of people that absolutely stands on individual rights, and that's happened over several hundred thousands of years. Honestly, we've gone from being part of a you know just a cog in the community to, like, every man's home is his castle, which was an English thing, so um to um and I think the fact that we value those things and we still think that they're important, even though maybe we've given or allowed the state to take too much power, that's a good sign. I think that people and the the longing and the understanding of individual autonomy is growing in the world, and that's an amazing thing. I think that's something to be celebrated. A lot of times, especially libertarians, can be gloom and doomers. And I like to step back and say, in this society now, the individual is celebrated. The individual uh, is cherished for his or her actual individuality, and that's a good thing.
Well, of course, it's a good thing, and that's really the intent. The original intent was that government should be small and limited. The power of government should be located in local areas, not in a national area, where you could walk up to the door of some guy who's running your town and knock on the door and say, "Joe, I didn't like what you did last night. You're never going to get my vote again," because he lives in your community. And that kind of concept did celebrate individuality, and that's what was written originally. And that was the concept. Local government is where the power resided, and that power was given to local government by individual free people.
So, do you think the United States has become too large? I'm a big secession fan, so.
Uh, well, I believe that to be honest with you, the founders of our nation gave the states three powers: nullification, interposition, and secession. And secession is, as far as I'm concerned, is definitely the right of a state to do that, because the Constitution was a voluntary union of states.
Do you
The
think an
state,
individual has a right to secede from the state
absolutely.
with his property?
Well, that's where the problem comes in, is that the local governments don't don't do that. They
Right,
collect taxes on your
right.
property. So
They are like the king. It's their fiefdom, and you're just renting it.
that is true, and that, to me, that is terrible. I'm very much against that. But here in North Carolina, as I'm sure you know, it is required by the Constitution of our state that local counties collect property tax as their primary source of income. If I could get rid of that, I would love it.
And sell booze. That always, when I first moved here in the 90s, and I I guess I was pretty young and I didn't know a lot about American politics, and I never lived in an ABC state, uh, and it was I was like, "What? What kind of Soviet bullshit is this?" It just floored me. Uh, Also, when I joined the Libertarian Party in North Carolina, and someone told me I was talking about write-in votes, and they were like, "Oh, they just throw those away." And I was like, "No, that, you know, I mean, Maryland, where I grew up, has a lot of issues, but the write-in vote there, at least were in the 80s, was kind of a sacred thing, you know." And I was like, no, that can't be. That's not. I mean, I used to work for the Board of Elections, you know. I was like, don't throw votes away." Um, and but they do. It's absolutely floors me that that's the case. So yeah, this is- I've loved living in North Carolina, and there's a lot of amazing things here. Um, and the state government isn't, the worst of any state, and I wouldn't choose a place to live just because I liked or hated the government anyway. Um, but there have been some interesting quirks. Can't take a picture of your own ballot for now. That's changing.
Well, I certainly hope so, because you should be able to do that to verify what your ballot was.
Oh yeah.
Other Otherwise, how do you have any proof? When
Yep.
that when that ballot goes when they feed that ballot into the ballot machine, you don't even know what's happening.
Yep. And I mean that it's interesting that people who are for being able to photograph your ballot have two different kind of takes, and I think both are important. One is that's the best receipt you can have. The second is it's my ballot. I want to show off. I voted for Chase Oliver. I want everyone to know, before the end of the day, so that, to encourage other people to go. I want to brag. Um, and neither one of those things are any of the state's business, but
Well, that's true,
we'll find out.
and unfortunately now, as with the digital age, the state has more and more ability to watch over us, which I
But
think,
we have more and more ability to skirt it as well.
depending on how adept you are.
Yes.
You have to
Yeah,
know you have
I'm
to
not
know
a
how to do that, you know?
this is where I'm not the best libertarian, because, and I hate saying this publicly, as a libertarian, privacy has never been my number one issue, and I know that it's important. I know it's vital for libertarians. Privacy from the state. I mean, your own privacy toward your insurance company or whatever, you can arrange that for yourself, but your privacy with respect to the state, I know it's important. Um, I dislike all those things. I think the guys in England who go around destroying the traffic cams are freaking heroes. Um, but it's not the issue that motivates me the most. I always tend to think there's so much data that it just so I don't know. I don't really have any excuse. I just can't get as upset about it as I feel I should.
Well, the
But yeah,
point is, but privacy is your control. That's control of your own private space. If the government can intrude in that and watch over you, that's part of your freedom. Your individual freedom is in someone else's hands.
I get it. I get it. A lot of times people conflate uh, corporate things with government things because the state makes sure that they're all bound up together. So Like, I don't want the automobile insurance company knowing what my driving habits are or where I'm going. That wouldn't be a problem in a free market. You'd find another company that respected that. I want the insurance company to track my speed and my braking and stuff because I drive good. I'm just saying. And I want to be rewarded for that. So I'd be cool with that. But what everyone knows is that that data is then available to the state. And that's what people are concerned about at root. And they should be.
Well, they should be, because as the state gets more and more ability to know more and more things and exert control over certain things, for instance, your bank account and things like that, you can actually be in a serious loss of your ability to do what you want. If the government can censor you financially for not doing what it thinks is correct, then you are not free at all. That's what dictatorships do. Dictatorships have done that and tried to do that for centuries. Now they have more and more tools to be able to do that successfully. And that's wrong. And that's why privacy is so important. Because
I do
if
think it's one of the key issues. Education privacy. Yeah. I do. I agree with that.
I'm glad you do.
I want to go back to the idea that of the solution or solution for anything, because I have run for office several times, and I've had people say, and it's so weird to me, well, I have this problem, you know, my son has Down syndrome and needs a wheelchair and special accommodations in class and stuff. What would you do about that? I'm not a teacher. I'm not a doctor. It always seemed like such a bizarre question to me. But you can't just, you know, shrug your shoulders and say, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a doctor. What do you expect me to do for your child? Because that's mean. And people don't respond very well to you being a jerk. And why would you want to be a jerk? What we need to do is convey to people that if we're choosing or supporting a solution, we're shutting down a bunch of other solutions. In my example of that, one of my favorite examples of that is when you look at, I used to live in Western Kansas years ago, back in the early 80s, late 80s. And I learned or heard a lot there. I mean, it was past that time, but I heard a lot about rural electrification and how important, because I grew up near Baltimore. Then I moved to Western Kansas, and they're like, oh, it's so important to, you know, string all these power lines along these, you know, rural roads so everyone could have power and light and, you know, run their farm equipment. And that sounds good. But if you look at a Sears catalog from like the 40s and 50s, you will see steam turbines to produce electricity and wind turbines and all kinds of interesting solutions. Those things had no chance to grow and develop when free electricity that you were paying for, so you might as well take, was there on the wires just for the cost of voting. So what that did was shut down the development of personalized alternative energy solutions. If we hadn't had some big push to electrify every house in the remotest area of farmlands, we would have developed a market for individual power solutions. We'd have, you know, and we're getting there now, but after a delay of decades. And it's the same with telecommunications. Now everybody has to have rural broadband. Why? You're just wasting money because in 5 years everyone's going to have access to, you know, Starlink or Kuiper or whatever they're calling it now. So it's you're actually suppressing the development of new technologies by adopting a one size fits old technology fits all.
That's
If that
that's
makes
kind
sense.
of well, that's a kind of an interesting example that you've given. Because one of the things that you have to also understand, I think, is the efficiency. When you're talking about energy, there is an efficiency factor that you cannot necessarily do on an individual basis. For instance, there is nothing, there's no power source on earth greater than a barrel of oil. It's just the fact of physics is that there is more energy in a barrel of oil than you can get from a wind turbine or a solar panel or anything like that. You cannot come close to the efficiency of a barrel of oil. A barrel of oil can do the work of 49 men per hour. It's just one of those things that it became a source of energy because it was so efficient and so good. You
But
cannot
I'm not even
you
really
cannot
arguing.
yeah, I'm sorry, but you cannot compete with the efficiency factor there. And the
Mm,
same
I
and
I'm I'm not
yeah.
arguing for any particular solution.
Mm,
Although I will say that it really varies. So if you are raising cattle in western Kansas and you have a well with a stock tank there to water them out in the middle of your not even back 40, your back 4,000 acres, way out. And that are you gonna like drag barrels of oil out there and run your pump? No, you're gonna set up a windmill and it's gonna pump the water. So every situation has a different set of solutions. But beyond that, I think it's important to recognize, and I think this is one of the things that gets lost. There's a cost to living in the country. If you
mhm.
want to live in the country, 20 miles from the nearest town and 50 miles from the nearest, you know, reasonable small city, there's a cost to that. You can't it's like in New York, or in big cities where they talk about food deserts. There's a cost to living in a place with, a lot of tenement housing or a lot of expensive business real estate. It, there's just not going to be. You're going to have to walk further to get food. Same in the country. It's going to cost more to get power, to get telecommunications, and making city people subsidize rural people. Here's a good example. Postal delivery. Everyone pays the same for a stamp. It That's kind of weird. That's not how FedEx does it. I mean, and is it convenient that I can send a letter to the next town or to California um, for the same 56 cents or whatever? Sure. But that doesn't make sense.
Well, that's why FedEx and UPS are doing really good and the post service is not.
The postal
Po
service exists by selling spam, basically,
True.
services. Yeah.
And they're more than 50 cents, by the way. I think they're
Oh,
around up in the 70s now.
that
But
shows you how
but you're
old I am. Boomer moment. I don't know.
and so there always is going to be changes in people's habits based upon what's available. For instance, I don't know too many people writing letters. I think you have a computer, you send an email, which is
I wish
free.
I could weld my mailbox shut. I
You
wish I
wouldn't get
could
any.
weld my email box shut too. um, but yeah, it's because all I get from it is spam and the occasional threat from the government. So
it's an interesting thing that you brought up, because on one level, what you say is really true, is that some people are subsidizing others in one way, and then other people are getting subsidized back in a way. So there is some kind of a cooperative system for some things. And that's kind of what I asked you a while ago, is that, is there a function for government, in your view? Is there a function of government that allows for a certain basic level of inter I don't know what the word would be, inter subsidy, interpersonal subsidy back and forth, where I scratch your back and you scratch mine, so that we can all live a sort of basic life?
I think that's what the market is for,
Hmm.
and not the state. I think the only legitimate function of the government can be to protect individual rights. Um, but paradoxically, it seems to do the exact opposite. So
So,
therefore, I'm an anarchist.
so you wouldn't have any problem if a private company decided to electrify rural Kansas, or in our case, rural North Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. the The problem comes when one solution is chosen. We're going to do this. We're going to do it by giving contracts to this big company, Duke Power or whatever. We're going to have certain requirements. We're going to, have a one size fits all solution. Um, and it, and we're going uh, to um, actively discourage that. So um, any kind of alternative solutions. I mean, I think if we hadn't had the, I love interstates. I love roads altogether. I love interstates. I love fast roads. I like slow roads. It's fantastic. But I think if we hadn't had the interstate system, we'd have flying cars. We'd have tunnels. We'd have all kinds of different solutions. We would have interstate like things that were private roads or community roads that hooked up together. Um, I think having, choosing one system and giving it state sanction withers other potential ideas. Um, and same with education, same with healthcare. Um, we have to have a certain number of MRI scanners per community and hospitals, and um, there could be some technology completely different, but because it's not in the books, you can't even explore it in any meaningful sense. I don't know. The This has invaded food to a large degree in terms of regulation and things like that. But the food market is still remarkably open. I know a lot of people will disagree with that, but you can still buy and sell a lot of things, and the you have a lot of choices in the food marketplace. Um, and that's because the state doesn't run grocery stores. If it did, it would be like the ABC system in North Carolina. Be some Soviet bullshit.
What you're really talking about is, when bureaucracy grows, regulations grow. And that's what we're suffering from. We're suffering from a bureaucracy at primarily at the federal level, but still at even the state level. and to some degree at the more local level, but it's the bureaucracy which is making those rules, and their excuse is always to make you safer. And I disagree with that. It's not up to the state to make me safe. It's up to me to make me safe. So I'm with you on that. Those rules are wrong. We shouldn't have them because it's not up to the government to protect me from things that
So
are
what do
common.
you think is the function of the government?
Well, like I said, that's what we really have to talk about in this country is to understand at what level are we comfortable and is with government's power, and what level is that is reasonable and acceptable. And that's where the problem comes in. We have a lot of people who want almost near total government. They want to depend on the government. And you have other people who want zero government or very close to zero government. And
Let's make it like a cable company. You can subscribe to the government services or
yeah.
not.
Mhm.
You and we kind of have that now if you look at it. But the state is really big into bundling. You can't get cable without getting ESPN. That used to drive me crazy. It's like, oh my God, can't I just like get, some channels without getting all the sports crap? Nothing personal if you like sports, but um that's kind of how it is being a US citizen. It's like, wow, can I get NASA without getting bombing other countries? I mean, I don't know. I heard a very cute thing the other day, and then I saw this actually in an elevator at work, and it was amazing to see it in action. Um, Someone asked what federal agency has the most fans, the most solid fan base in the US. You do not see people, wearing an ATF is that even a thing anymore? Whatever it
Yeah,
is,
it is.
or carrying a bag for um, for Department of Education. You know, um, you do see military stuff, but that's usually because those people are in the military. The one government agency that's not involved with killing people, that people seem very excited about and that actually has a fan base, NASA. Every day you'll see someone in a jacket or who's got like a patch that's, NASA. That excites people. That's cool. That's probably a service that if the government asked people to fund, they would voluntarily do it. And I think that's how it should be done. Um, would they pay to run an Air Force base in Germany? I'm not sure people would be as enthused about that. So
Well, the question then is how do you go about that from a governmental point of view? Because a democracy is mob rule, and that's not what is good and not will not help us out. So you can't have elections or votes on every particular plan or program that you want to.
I used to think that that was a good thing. I used to, and I think that, like Thomas Massey, we were talking about him earlier, um, and other decent congressional Republicans have proposed the same thing, that spending bills should be more granular. There should be individual votes on pieces rather than bundling everything together, because it's the bundling that allows shenanigans to happen. Uh, so in some ways, if we all had, some kind of terminal or something, and it was like, oh, today we're voting on NASA, or today we're voting on funding, you know, another war, and people could choose. In some ways, that would be better, but
Not
I,
really.
but I don't think that should be done at all. No one should be voting on how my money gets spent. Uh, there's a fun proposal, not even proposal, but idea that some people have that sets your tax burden. So say my tax burden was $10,000 a year, and I got to choose how it was allocated broadly, like to defense, Department of War, whatever, to education, to NASA. I keep coming back to it. Department of Agriculture, USDA. They do some great work. They do some annoying work, but that might be a good thing. It could also be a disaster. There's a feeling among government people that the people they govern can't make their choices about where their money should be spent, which is a really bizarre thought. Can't and shouldn't. Oh, well, you can't let people decide those things because they would do all the wrong things. Like we elect the best and the brightest and the most moral among us to go make those decisions. We know that's not true. It's the exact opposite in most cases. I don't know there's no easy answers. That's why I'm an anarchist.
Well, I understand that, and you certainly have the right to be an anarchist, but there are some negatives to anarchy. That's the other end that's one end of the government spectrum. It goes from anarchy to totalitarianism. And there is some place on that scale which really works for most people and keeps us free as individuals. And that's the point where we kind of have to settle on that point. We have over 340 million people in this country. That's a lot of people. And that's difficult. It's not like having, 150 people in a little town
that's part of the problem.
Right.
Why do we have such a large governing unit? Why they're a teeny little country. People will say, oh, well, what if China invades us? Or what if China tries to take over or buys up the United States? I don't see them buying Liechtenstein. Like, I don't, part of the problem is people are wedded to this idea of the United States as a world superpower. And I do not understand that. Like, why would you want your country to be in the position where it's the champion of a bunch of other countries and the provider for a bunch of other countries? That's a terrible idea. So I get it. It's a very sweet patriotic feeling that people have that, the United States is only out for the best for everyone. And, we would want to take over Greenland because we want to protect them. I don't know from what, I don't know, from China, I guess, or Russia. But first of all, we know that's bullshit in large part. And second, even if it's true, that's not the way the world should be working. We, shouldn't be forced to be the protectors or the owners of other people's stuff. Oh, you just reminded me of something I was really passionate about earlier in the year when they were doing all that weird stuff about Greenland. That really made me mad. Irrationally mad. Like, I was like, yeah. But with this administration, we have no idea what's going to happen next, which I think is part of their strategy, such as it is. Yeah.
So why don't you sum up for us what your feeling is? What is your worldview of what we should be like in our country?
I think if we focus too much on country or nation state, I think Americans, in large part, are too focused on being American or what it is to be American or what the American scene is or the American responsibility. It's like England used to be. We have this burden or something about the world. And I think we need to get away from that and think what it means to be people in the world, interacting with other people in our communities, um, in our families, and with people across the world, but not in the sense of like, oh, I don't want to talk to these people because they're Chinese, so they're communist. That's bullshit. I mean, maybe they are, maybe they're not. Um, I think we need to keep moving forward, making progress on that idea of the individual and his place in the greater human society and the smaller human communities that he's part of, rather than thinking so much about what a nation means. Does that make sense?
Sure does. You have articulated your worldview very well, and you are
Well, thanks for
entitled.
giving me the chance.
Well, that's what this is about. And I want to thank you very much, Susan Hogarth, for being a guest on Freedom Forum Live.
I've enjoyed the chat.
Thank you, and good night.
Good night.